I'm Melissa.
And I'm Lee, and we are busy mums, company founders, and all-round early learning nerds. Welcome to our podcast, Growing Little Humans.
Kids aren't born with a user manual, so each week we'll try and cover many topics that you guys encounter and worry about each and every day while you're raising your little humans. We are very excited to have an amazing paediatrician dietitian with us today. Aisling Oslizlok has over 12 years of experience working in some of the world's leading children's hospitals. She is passionate about helping families navigate challenging feeding issues and has supported hundreds of families throughout the UAE on their child's journey with food. As a mum to 2 young kids, Aisling is very familiar with the challenges that each mealtime can bring. She brings practical advice, support, and tips to parents, helping them to turn mealtimes into occasions of joy and connection. She is passionate about helping families navigate challenging feeding issues and has supported hundreds of families throughout the UAE on their child's journey with food.
Hi, Aisling. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So today we're here to talk about the first 1,000 days of nutrition for in a child's life, I guess. So can you define for us what are the first 1,000 days and why are they so important?
Yes, definitely. So the first 1,000 days, it's a topic that's become a lot more ubiquitous in the media nowadays, and thankfully there's a lot more research going into these first 1,000 days. This is the period of your child's life that refers to the moment from conception right up to the child's second birthday. So that all amounts to roughly 1,000 days, give or take. And what we know now is that this period of life is absolutely crucial for setting the blueprint for your child's long-term health outcomes. And it's called the golden window of opportunity to really set those foundations in place for your child to have a long, healthy life.
Amazing. So how does nutrition impact on brain development in those first 1,000 days?
So nutrition plays a really fundamental role. When we think about brain development, the brain develops at an absolutely astonishing rate in these first 1,000 days. So, by the 4th week of pregnancy, the brain already has about 10,000 cells. If you look at the 24th week of pregnancy, that's increased to 10 billion cells. So it's a really period of rapid growth of development for the brain, which doesn't happen at any other stage of life, the speed at which these cells develop. And nutrition provides the fuel for that growth and development. So it provides all of the energy and the nutrients that the body needs to grow and develop the brain. And this continues both from pregnancy right through to when the child is born. And by 3 years of age, the brain has reached about 80% of its adult size. So that's why it's so fundamentally important that we're providing the right nutrition to allow this growth to develop as best it can.
And just hearing that and the statistics with the brain growth and development, it's just mind-blowing, how much development is happening at that time. But I feel like even though there is a lot of education around, for mums that are getting pregnant, I feel like, I didn't grasp how fundamentally important my own nutrition was during that period. I mean, we do all try to be healthy, right? But I think, if it was more clearly defined in like pre-pregnancy and then when you get pregnant, that parents understand that their brain power of their child is a lot of it's coming down to that pregnancy period and what you're feeding your body.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a good point, Lee, because it can be, and one thing I do want to say is that it can be a really overwhelming topic for a lot of parents. For example, my child is 3 years old now, and if I was listening to this for the first time, I'd be thinking, oh, did I miss that? But the important thing really to say here is know that this is, we want to reframe this to being, it's a window of opportunity.
Yes.
And I think the burden of responsibility can feel huge for parents, especially for mothers. They're the ones carrying the babies. But really, knowledge is power. And if we know what we can do to try and, it's all about optimizing the health and well-being of our child. So I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed, by this information,
or I've missed out,
or that they've missed out. Absolutely not. It's about just empowering, people with that knowledge. you know, as you're saying as well, not just women that are pregnant or that have babies, but even people that are considering conceiving in the near future.
Yes.
Because, you know, what we eat during pregnancy and even pre-pregnancy can have an impact on our child's health. And you're right. It's, you know, we didn't actually probably really have this knowledge, you know,
Yes.
when we were
Research
pregnant.
is so
research.
constantly happening, isn't it?
It's changing all the time. And that's a good thing. You know, it's a good thing to have
gaining
this
knowledge.
power.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not just about, I think there's a lot of investment now, thankfully, going into this topic from, you know, economic leaders in the world, because we've seen that countries that invest in the health and well-being of women and babies, they tend to, you know, this positively impacts the economy, because children that are well and healthy are going to be able to perform better at school, have better, you know, social, economic outcomes.
I talk about that a lot. We're being a teacher, that I say to people, you know, you pay all this money, send them to a private school or send them to the For Good education. They need to go there and have fuel in the tank so that they are not getting tired, and they're really optimising their educational experience. So it is really, really
and
important.
the right fuel in the
tank.
And
the right fuel, sorry, yes. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Definitely.
And I think too, it also, you know, from an economic standpoint, it is important that governments invest, because if people have better nutritional foundations, then it reduces the burden on the healthcare industry. As, you know, children are growing and becoming adults and then becoming older in life, hopefully with that solid foundation of nutrition, they will have better health overall.
And the science is really clear, you know, that if you really invest well in these early years and invest in the maternal health as well, the outcomes are far better from a health perspective, an economic perspective, social perspective.
So what, in the baby's first 6 months of life, what is the most important parts for infant nutrition?
So if we take it even earlier to that, even during pregnancy, there's some fascinating research coming out now about that last trimester, that actually this could be defined as being the baby's first tastes, because this is when the baby's becoming a lot more perceptive of the world around them. They can hear noises in the womb. They you know, they can tell the difference between light and dark, and also the taste that a mother will eat, they can transfuse through the placenta into the amniotic fluid, which the baby then swallows. So this is actually, now we're thinking, is maybe can impact what the baby likes and dislikes in later years. You often hear stories of mums that had cravings for certain foods during pregnancy, and the baby then goes on to also like those foods. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're pregnant, particularly in that last trimester, of trying to have as many different tastes as possible in your diet, you know, that you can tolerate. In your diet as much as possible, to really set your child up to develop, you know, their taste buds and to develop their palate. And then once they're born, in the first 6 months of life, it's really all about what type of milk feed they have. So, you know, I'm very, very much an advocate for choice for mothers when it comes to feeding their baby. And I think there's so much pressure around women these days to breastfeed. And, you know, really, I think with women's lives today, particularly in the UAE and in the Middle East, maternity leave is not that long. You know, we get 6 weeks, which can put a huge amount of pressure on mums to breastfeed and continue breastfeeding when they go back. So I do want to just caveat that. However, as a healthcare professional, it would be remiss of me not to state that breastfeeding really does provide everything that your baby needs in those first 6 months of life. So, you know, from the moment a child is born, and even a little bit before, the breasts start to produce colostrum. And this is often called liquid gold. This is a really amazing liquid that contains a huge amount of properties that are unique to your baby. So it's absolutely jam-packed with what are called bioactive compounds. So it's a live liquid, and it also has a number of immune enhancing compounds, so things that will really benefit your baby's immune system. And this cannot be replicated, unfortunately, in formula. So
Formula.
I always say to parents that even if they choose not to breastfeed or they can't breastfeed for whatever reason, that they really try to prioritize, if they can, even giving that little bit of colostrum to their baby, because this can really lay some very, important foundations with the baby's, overall health and their gut microbiome as well.
Right.
So that colostrum, you don't even have to feed the baby that directly. This can be harvested using like little syringe things. Haka, for example, have a colostrum harvesting. It's a horrible word
It's
to
a
use,
strange word, isn't it?
but it can help you to take some of that colostrum out and feed your baby. Just a note on that, for first time mums, it's not always ready before the birth, so don't panic if it's not coming out.
Right.
It can also induce labor, so don't try to do it too soon if you're not ready. But that colostrum in the first few days of life is really amazing. Moving on then, if you can breastfeed and if you choose to breastfeed, fantastic. This is completely free. It is completely unique to your baby, and it's adaptive, which means that it's going to change according to what your baby needs, which is absolutely phenomenal.
And it's also just so convenient for new mums too. There's no bottle preparation. It's the harder road to go in some ways to do bottle feeding, because there's so much work involved in that.
Definitely.
The right amount, the right temperature, everything.
Yes. Making sure everything's sterilized as well. Like the risk of gastroinfections is a real thing, and it can be fatal, for babies, particularly premature babies. So breastfeeding really, can help to reduce that risk significantly. And the way the milk changes in composition as well is just mind-blowing. So the breast milk in a 2-week-old baby, a morning feed, is going to be an entirely different substance to the milk that's produced in a 4-month-old in their evening feed, for example. Right. It's like a totally different
incredible.
food. Yeah. And it's, there's this feedback mechanism that goes on between the mum and baby when they're feeding, so that the breast milk will adapt and change to give the baby what it needs, whether that's more fluid in the warmer months, or whether that's, more antibodies if they're brewing some kind of infection. It's really mind-blowing.
Wow.
Now,
that's just astonishing. I had no idea. I just thought breast milk was breast milk. Of course, it includes all the nutrients they need, but I had no idea it actually evolves.
It evolves, and even the calories and the protein, the fat, all of those combinations change according to what the baby needs. So you might hear some mums saying, for example, I get a lot of mums saying, my baby is feeding less, or my baby it's not increasing in volume. If you're bottle feeding, you might go from 2 ounces to 3 ounces to 4 ounces. If you're breastfeeding, it might stay at 15 to 20 minutes. But that's because the composition is changing the whole time of the milk to meet the baby's needs.
So once the child's through that first 6 months, when do you think is the optimum time to be starting to introduce some solid foods, and what's your advice on what those first solid foods should be?
Like everything, the science on this is changing all the time. And historically, it used to be that we should wait until 6 months of age before we start solids. Now we know that the gut, the digestive system in full-term babies, is actually developmentally ready for food anytime after about kind of 17, 18 weeks. Okay. So for some babies, it's actually beneficial to start foods a bit earlier. So particularly for babies maybe that have suffered with reflux. These are babies that we'd say, early weaning could be a good thing for them, to try and get those kind of heavier, more solid foods into the tummy so that they can reduce their reliance on milk a bit more. Anything from that kind of, 4 to 6 months is a really good time to be thinking about introducing some solid foods. When I say introducing, I mean, really, we're talking about very early tastes of foods. The amount that the baby is going to eat at this stage is almost negligible, but it's just introducing them to that concept of having something in their mouth that's not milk.
And also some variety, so that their tastes are kind of being expanded a little.
Yeah, definitely, because I think one of the riskier things to do is actually to delay weaning. We're always so caught up on that 6 months, mustn't give baby food before 6 months of age, that actually we can be at risk of delaying weaning a bit too late. And there is really a nice little window of opportunity where the baby will accept a whole range of different tastes, and we should be making the most of that. So I always say, definitely not before 17 weeks, but anytime after kind of 18 weeks up to about 6 months of age, you're starting to look for signs of readiness in your baby.
Yeah.
So that's things like, have they lost their tongue thrust? So you'll see a lot of babies that kind of push their tongue out. That's a really good indication that they're not ready. If they're still pushing things out with their tongue, they're just not ready. Leave it a couple of weeks. Are they able to sit up and hold their head? They don't need to be able to sit independently, but they do need to be able to hold their head fairly steady. And that's to kind of reduce the risk of any choking. These are signs that we can look out for. And then when it comes to what type of foods we want to be looking at, I always say keep it simple. So start with the kind of root vegetables, the bitter vegetables. This is a really good time when your baby will accept almost anything.
Yeah.
So make the most of that. Try to leave the sort of sweeter foods to a little bit later in your journey, because
we you know they're going to like that. Yes, they're going to
Exactly.
like the
More
sweet
chance,
potato and the
100%.
Okay.
Breast milk is naturally very sweet in taste. So the babies will always, lean towards those tastes.
Yeah.
But if we can get them accepting those more bitter tastes earlier, that can be a good thing.
And I've heard too, Aisling, that it's important to expose them to, especially a child that maybe has shown signs of eczema, to be trying to quite quickly introduce the allergen kind of foods like, let's say, peanuts and eggs and those types of things. Is that correct?
I'm so glad you asked this question, because this is my absolute area of passion is allergies. And you're 100% correct. Early introduction of allergens is beneficial in reducing the risk of babies going on to develop allergies in later life.
Right.
So this is particularly relevant in children, like you said, at high risk of allergies. So these are children that have moderate to severe eczema, or children that maybe have another existing food allergy. For example, cow's milk allergy is quite common in young infants, in babies. So if your child does have a higher risk of allergy, or even if they don't, it's still a good idea to try to introduce those allergenic foods early in the weaning journey. That's things like cow's milk, eggs, peanuts, like you said, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, soy. These should all be given in small but frequent quantities in those early weaning stages.
Great. And so is there any resources or programs or support networks that you would recommend for parents who are, needing more guidance about this first, really, really important time?
Yeah, there is one main one that I recommend to every mum, regardless of how many kids they have or what style of weaning they want to go, whether that's baby-led or purees. The Solid Starts website and app is absolutely fantastic. I cannot rave enough about this.
Yeah.
It's free, first of all. It comes as a website and an app.
Yeah.
They do have paid add-ons as well if you want to go a bit more in depth. But they have this feature on the website and the app that where you can type in any food, literally any food, and it will give you so much information about the nutrition that food is offering. Whether it's an allergenic food or not, but most importantly, it will give you a guide on how to serve this how to serve this food to your baby.
Okay.
So if the baby is about 6 months of age, it gives you the sizes of how you might want to prepare the food.
Yeah.
When it's 9 months of age, and then again at 12 months plus, and it shows you a picture, of what it looks like, which is what so many parents need, is
Absolutely.
just show me how to do
so
this.
helpful, because a lot of the time it's you're doing what your parents did for you, and they'll give you that advice or something that you've read and you're not sure if it's the most current. So I think that's really, really helpful to break it down for parents to know exactly.
And they also have an amazing video on their website as well that shows the difference between gagging and choking. I'd recommend everyone have a look at that.
Yeah.
Well, we are going to include, Aisling, in our show notes, that information, the resource, so parents can access that easily. And we're also going to include your contact so that if parents want to approach you for some advice, they can do so. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your great knowledge today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And here come the legals. Our podcast is purely brought to you for educational and entertainment purposes. We are just two hectic mums, and we are certainly not licensed therapists.
This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of licensed or qualified professionals. And if you do need some help, please seek out some professional advice.